The Catholic Church, believe it or not, has always been involved in politics. Always. From the very beginning. Right? Who crucified Jesus? The Roman government, right? Right? We've always been involved in politics. Right? We not only have been involved, but what our church teaches is that you and I, whether you're a priest like me, or a layperson, married, single, divorced, widowed, whatever you may be, we have not only a right to be involved in politics, we actually have an obligation. We have an obligation as Christian people to be involved in politics. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily we all have to run for office. The church is not telling us that. But we have an obligation to be involved in the political process. So often you hear, and I won't get into all of this, but you hear phrases like separation of church and state, right? And that's a real phrase. It has historical background, and you can read all about it. But so often that line right there means to a lot of people, there's my religious self, and then there's my political self. And what the Catholic Church wants to get across to every single one of us is that those two things should be the same. That we don't, at the ballot box, we don't leave our Catholicism at home. We bring, whether we're running for office, whether we're voting, whether we're involved in a political campaign of some kind, we bring our Catholicism into every aspect of our lives. So often, where we get in trouble is when we try to compartmentalize things. Well, yes, I'm Catholic, but anytime you're like using that phrase right there, right, we're going down a wrong road. Well, I'm Catholic, but I don't do everything. You know, I'm not an extreme Catholic. I'm not a radical Catholic, right? Jesus is calling us to be radical and nothing less. That's what we're called to from our baptism. And so, in the political realm, we do not leave our Catholicism at the door. Now, I want to read to you something that I saw recently that I think is very, very helpful. And it says this. When I talk about greater justice for immigrants, I'm called a Democrat. I did not write this, by the way. When I speak up against abortion, I'm called a Republican. When I talk about racism and racial inequality, I'm called a Democrat. When I mention small, localized government, I'm called a Republican. When I support the common good and solidarity, I'm called a Democrat. When I say the family should be strengthened, I'm called a Republican. When I speak up against the death penalty, I'm called a Democrat. When I refuse to fund contraception, I'm called a Republican. In truth, I'm a member of an institution that teaches that freedom is when a person no longer acts under the influence of someone else. An institution that encourages free will and free thought. An institution that doesn't fit inside a man-made box. I'm Catholic. Thought-provoking. Okay. So, there's lots to talk about, and we could go on and on and on, but we're not going to. We're going to get to the nitty-gritty of what is a Catholic to do in the year 2016. Now, you're going to be profoundly disappointed. You may throw things at me in that you're not going to walk at the very end. I'm not going to say, and in conclusion, vote for, and then walk out of the room. Right? I'm not going to do that. Right? And the church isn't going to do that either. The U.S. bishops don't get together and say, I think Trump's our guy. All right, let's tell our people. Everyone, to the pulpits. All right? We don't do that. Right? What the Catholic Church does is we do not endorse candidates. But what we do is we proclaim very clearly as we can, and as loudly and proudly as we can, we proclaim certain principles on which the moral teaching of our church is built. And those moral principles come with us into the voting booth. And hopefully, if you're running for office, if you're a political office holder at any level, that you're bringing those moral principles into the job that you do. That's also true of jobs outside the political sphere, by the way. It's not that if you're a business person, that you leave your Catholicism at the door and treat your employees like dirt, right? You are a Catholic businessman. You are a Catholic businesswoman. You're a Catholic doctor. You're a Catholic lawyer. You're a Catholic teacher. Whatever you are, we bring our faith into the public sphere whenever we possibly can. Okay, so the church lays out, and on this handout that you have, this is a kind of nice little one-page summary of the document that the U.S. bishops wrote. And they wrote it starting back in the 1980s, was the first time this document was written. And then it's been updated every election year, including this year. So if you take a look at this document here in front of you, it says, we vote because we are citizens, but we vote conscientiously because we are people of faith. Our consciences are formed through studying Scripture and the teachings of the church, examination of the facts, and prayerful reflection. This brief insert is intended as a starting point to help us respond to our choices in the current political landscape. All right, so one of the first major principles when we talk about voting, and I would say it's a misconception, is that all issues are equal. What the Catholic Church says is that all issues are not equal. I'll give you an example. College friend of mine, we used to, back in the kind of mid-90s, we'd argue about things, and so I'd be arguing for the pro-life issue, specifically on the subject of abortion. And I would say, I cannot vote for this candidate because they support abortion. They support legal abortion. I can't vote for them. And this person would say back to me, but have you seen the legislation that they wrote on clean water? Clean water is important. Now, you're going to get my agreement every time. Clean water is important. But are the issues of abortion and clean water equal? The Catholic Church would say, no, they're not. Right? Do we want clean water? Yes. Is that actually mentioned in the bishop's document? Yes. But are all moral issues equal? They're not. There is a kind of hierarchy of issues, and that's what we see here. So, number one, every single time, is going to be issues that directly affect human lives, especially innocent human lives. So we'll get into the death penalty in just a second. But we talk first and foremost about abortion and euthanasia. Just the stats. Since abortion was legalized in 1973, there have been in upwards of 50 million abortions in this country. Just in this country. 50 million. Okay? There were some before it was legal. It was legal in certain states before it was legalized in all 50 states by 1973. And now there are certain laws, kind of state by state, that try to regulate and decrease the number of abortions. But there have been in upwards of 50 million. That's a conservative estimate. The subject of euthanasia is on the rise. I would say in the Western world, it started in kind of Western Europe. It made its way to Canada. And now has made its way to places like Oregon and Washington and California, where euthanasia is now legal. For Catholics, those are top-tier, number one issues, because they directly affect innocent human life. The Catholic Church would be so bold as to say, if a candidate is, at any level, is in favor of the right to an abortion, or in favor of expanding euthanasia, that person does not deserve our vote. Now, that's a hard thing to say, especially if you have a particular candidate that you like who is okay with those things. Right? That's kind of the hard teaching of it. That's why people say you should never talk about politics and religion in polite company. Right? Because this happens, right? People get mad. I'm not that any of you are mad. Maybe you are. But it gets a little tense. Right? When you open up your mouth and you use the word abortion, it gets tense. Am I right? Try that at work tomorrow. Don't, actually. Right? I mean, it gets a little tense because we're talking about serious stuff here. We're talking about life and death. We're talking about innocent human life. But we're also talking about the rights of women, and we're also talking about the good, and we're also talking about a society in which children, even after they're born, are not always taken very good care of, right? And so there's other issues to consider, without a doubt. We are not a one-issue people, but certain issues are more important than others. I'll give you an example of my own family. My mom, radically pro-life, just totally awesome. Loves babies, had 5 of them, 7 grandchildren. and has been a pro-life voter for a long time. I would say my mom, she'll probably listen to this later, we're recording it. My mom is, I would say, is a one-issue voter. So much so that back when I was in high school, there was an election, and people were, they call. You've all had that. You probably try to get on the do not call list after the local election here. But the guy running for railroad commissioner called. This is in Texas. We have railroad commissioners. And my mom asked, "What's your position on abortion?" And the guy said, "Well, I'm running for railroad commissioner." But to my mom, that was so vital an issue. What she didn't want was this guy to become railroad commissioner, and then to become a congressman, and then to become a senator, and then to become president, when she could have stopped him when he was railroad commissioner. Alright? So now, that's one way to look at it. That's one way to look at it. And I don't recommend that, in that we are not one-issue people. But nor, as a church, do we say that all issues are equal. So, go down the list here. Again, this is the U.S. Bishops of the United States. Our Constitution heralds religious liberty in the First Amendment. Yet increasingly, people of faith are having to fight to retain this basic right. This is going to get worse. This is trending not in our direction. And this is going to get worse. As religious liberties are shrinking. And some of that is because we haven't spoken up enough. So some of that is on us. Some of that is on various government officials and policies that are squeezing out religious rights. You're going to start hearing, if you haven't already, there's a phrase that's being used oftentimes where we would say that we have the right to practice our faith, the right to our religion, and it's oftentimes now being changed to the right to worship. Right? So they're basically saying it's a Sunday thing that you have the right to do versus living out your faith all during the week. So we've seen this in various cases, the Hobby Lobby case. We've seen this where people are trying to protect their religious liberty in terms of there are things that my religious convictions, and this is true not just of Catholics, by the way. This has happened to Muslims and Jews. This has happened to people of a lot of different faiths. My faith says I can't support that. I own a private business, and policies now are coming down that says you have to. You have to. It's happened especially since gay marriage was legalized last year in the Obergefell decision last July. That those who are, especially in the wedding industry, you've seen it maybe, the bakers, photographers, those who would say, my religious convictions say that I don't want to participate in this wedding. By taking the pictures, by baking the cake, by decorating for the party. And in many, many states, they're now being told that they have to. The bakers in Oregon were fined. They were fined thousands and thousands of dollars for not baking a cake for a same-sex wedding. So, religious liberties are under attack. So that's number 2. Number 3 goes right along with it. There's a move in the nation to redefine marriage. The marriage of a man and woman is the foundation of the family and an essential core element of a flourishing society. We're losing. Someone say it's over. We lost. Done. We're never going back. And that very well may be true. Right? But in election after election, that issue has come up, and Catholics have not been as outspoken, both in the voting and in our public statements. We've not been as outspoken as we could be. But I would say this. I heard something the other day that was talking about the marriage issue. And they basically said that the problem with marriage is heterosexual marriage. Right? That we don't value in our own lives, just in our own families, in our own parishes, we don't value marriage enough. We don't hold it up. We don't support it. We don't do enough to help married couples and to teach our kids the beauty and the dignity of the marriage between a man and a woman. And so what has happened in this country is that marriage has been legally redefined. Do not be surprised. Do not be surprised if it gets redefined again. So as many people have said, if it's arbitrary as to what sex two people are, isn't it also arbitrary, the number of people? So if two men, or a man and a woman, if there's, that's all sort of interchangeable. As one person said, what's so special about two? Now, that may sound extreme. Listen to this talk in 5 years. And that will not be an extreme position in this country, I'm predicting. Marriage of 3 people. It actually has a term. It's called a throuple. It's a term. So, the issue of marriage. Fourth, the growing disparity between rich and poor means most of the world's resources are in the hands of a small percentage of its people. The federal budget is a moral document and must prioritize the poorest and most vulnerable among us. Right? So this gets kind of dicey. Who's your candidate there? Who's your candidate on the other ones? I would say this year, more than any other, in my experience, you may disagree, feel free, the clarity isn't there. There's not as clear a decision, kind of one way or the other. All right? It goes on. Millions of undocumented persons living in the United States deserve our compassion. There is an immigration problem, and we need a humane solution to it. Right? You want to get people fired up at work in your neighborhood? Bring up immigration. Right? So my dad, I'm not revealing anything crazy here. My dad put a Donald Trump sign in our front yard. Now, my mom was really mad at him. And that sign did not last very long in our front yard. So he got another one, and he put it up there. And that didn't last. And he got another one, and that didn't last, right? He got to the point where he thought about getting cameras on the house to find out who keeps stealing the sign. And all of that, right? People feel incredibly strong on the subject of immigration, right? And it's a very complex issue. And I think that's something else that we can, as a people, is not give into being treated like simpletons, right? We're smart people, right? Whether you have a high level of education or not, we're smart people. We can handle the complexity of the immigration issue, right? And so to say sort of one scenario, either, I mean, as has been said, just build a wall. Just build a wall, and it's over. Okay? If you build a wall, it's not over. Right? The countries from which people are coming, who live in and around our community, and who go to this parish, the economies from which they're coming are terrible, and our economy is better. And if there's a wall, have there been other walls built that people found their way under or around or over? Yeah. And so to say, build a wall and we're done, and it's over, I think is a simple response to a very complex issue. And at the same time, to say, amnesty. Just wave a wand and everyone is legal. I would say it's equally simple. It's a complex issue, right? And we need complex people to try to solve it. And finally, war, terror, and violence have caused thousands of lost lives. We must work for just solutions in the Holy Land, throughout the Middle East, and beyond. And we've seen that over and over and over again, all over the world. It seems like things are getting ugly. Okay. From this document, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, I'd just like to read a couple paragraphs that I think will be very, very helpful. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'm just going to read paragraph 2. And the bishops of the United States say this: the political realities of our nation present us with opportunities and challenges. Page 9, if you've got it. We are a nation founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the right to life itself is not fully protected, especially for unborn children, the terminally ill, and the elderly, the most vulnerable members of the American family. We are called to be peacemakers in a nation at war. We are a country pledged to pursue liberty and justice for all, but we are too often divided across lines of race, ethnicity, and economic inequality. We are a nation of immigrants, struggling to address the challenges of many new immigrants in our midst. We are a society built on the strength of our families, called to defend marriage and offer moral and economic supports for family life. We are a powerful nation in a violent world, confronting terror and trying to build a safer, more just, more peaceful world. We are an affluent society where too many live in poverty and lack health care and other necessities of life. We are part of a global community charged with being good stewards of the Earth's environment, what Pope Francis calls our common home, which is being threatened. These challenges are at the heart of public life and at the center of the pursuit of the common good. They are intertwined and inseparable. As Pope Francis has insisted, we are faced with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. Now, here's the problem. Read that. Who's your candidate? Right? The term that's oftentimes being used for those who are Catholic and who are following this document to the letter is that we are politically homeless. Politically homeless. Now, the question is, how does that then affect kind of the day-to-day stuff, right? As you watch the news, maybe you go home tonight and watch the close of the Republican National Convention. By the way, the Trump speech leaked. So you can read it right now if you want to. Right? Maybe there'll be some last minute edits, but you can read. We won't miss it. I think it's probably about 9 o'clock tonight. But you can read it ahead of time if you want to. You can follow along as he's reading it. A staff person leaked it, I guess. But who's your candidate? So when you go to vote this November, and you walk into that voting booth and you read paragraph 2 of Faithful Citizenship, what do? Right? So the church is not going to tell you. The Pope Francis is not going to say, go out to the papal window, buongiorno, Hillary Clinton. You know, he's not going to do it, right? He's not going to do it. He's not going to say Republican or Democrat. He's not going to say, by the way, very interestingly, I would encourage you to look into some very interesting third-party candidates. Do not be surprised if in the next month or so that the Libertarian Party, which is Gary Johnson and Bill Wells, former governor of New Mexico, former governor of Massachusetts, if they don't get to 15% and get in one of those debates, I think it's going to happen. Among 18 to 29-year-olds, the Johnson-Weld ticket is polling higher than Trump-Pence. Now, 18 to 29-year-olds stay home, typically. Those of you who are political scientists, that group does not typically vote at a very high level. But they're polling higher. The third party is polling higher than the Republican Party among 18 to 29-year-olds. Very interesting. Okay, so we skip ahead. Great stuff in this document. Paragraph 14. Unfortunately, politics in our country often can be a contest of powerful interests, partisan attacks, sound bites, and media hype. I would say, opinion, that the 24-hour news cycle is not helping. It's not helping. The beast has to be fed, and it is going to be fed with whatever is out there. Right? We, as consumers of that news, we have to be very, very careful. If you are watching the news for more than a few minutes a day, I would say that you are susceptible to that kind of influence, where the smallest thing, which 20 years ago you might not even have known about, or might not even have been at all significant, suddenly becomes the issue of the day. Right? So now, I'm not for plagiarism. Right? I'm not for people copying other people's speeches. Right? But Tuesday night, Donald Trump's wife made a speech, and it had parts of the speech that were pretty darn identical, 96%, to a speech that Michelle Obama gave in 2008. Right? For 24 hours. That's what we talked about. Now, again, I run a school. I am against plagiarism. Right? It's not good. Is it 24 hours of news worthy? I would say no. I would say that we got bigger fish to fry. Have we talked about any of the issues that the bishops have laid out? Have we talked about pro-life issues? Have we talked about poverty? Have we talked about inequality? Have we talked about the environment? Have we talked about immigration? We haven't. But dang it, we have talked about plagiarism. We've conquered that issue. Actually, we probably haven't. Worse than it was. The church calls for a different kind of political engagement, one shaped by the moral convictions of well-formed consciences and focused on the dignity of every human being, the pursuit of the common good, and the protection of the weak and vulnerable. That line, pursuit of the common good, I think this is a very important thing, and I think a challenge to all of us as we vote. If you are voting for your own interests, the church would say there's a problem. If you're voting because you want this particular person who's going to be good for you in particular, that are your priorities, or mine if I do it, our priorities are out of whack. That when we vote, when we pull that lever, get local, state, national, it is the common good. It is what is best for all of us. And that's not just the people sitting in this room or the people that you go to church with. Right? That's all of us. The church would say born and unborn, documented and undocumented. What is in the best interest of all of us? And that's a great temptation, to vote for me. This person will do wonders for my taxes. Right? I'm happy for you. That's good, right? I guess. But is that best for the common good? That's, I think, a great challenge as we go to vote. Okay, there's one issue that I just want to get to, and that's the possibility of not voting. I've had a lot of people, friends of mine. I have a good friend who's a priest up in Indianapolis, and he's advocating this position, and that is that the two major party candidates, he's not, and at this point not really considering a third party candidate, he would say, have so crossed the line of the issues that we hold dear that we should consider not voting at all. Now, want to get people fired up, right? Tell them you're not participating. But he was saying, my buddy is saying, by not voting, is that the same as not participating? People always say, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. All right? I don't know how true that. This is a new phenomenon for me, in that I've never really considered it. I always try to vote in every election. The analogy he uses, and this is an extreme example, and he's not comparing either candidate to either of these two people. If you went to vote, for those of you who think that you have to pull the lever for somebody, and it was Hitler versus Stalin, would you vote? Would you say, oh, one is less bad? Right? So there are scenarios, I guess, in the fictional world, that where you might say, I can't do either one. Right? Are we at that point in the 2016 election? Very, very interesting. And so, what the bishops say, they actually address this issue. This is I'll start at paragraph 35, and then I'll stop and take some questions. The bishops say, there may be times when a Catholic who rejects a candidate's unacceptable position, even on policies promoting an intrinsically evil act, may reasonably decide to vote for that candidate for other morally grave reasons. Voting in this way would be permissible only for truly grave moral reasons, not to advance narrow interests or partisan preferences, or to ignore a fundamental moral evil. Paragraph 36. When all candidates hold a position that promotes an intrinsically evil act, the conscientious voter faces a dilemma. The voter may decide to take the extraordinary step of not voting for any candidate, or, after careful deliberation, may decide to vote for the candidate deemed less likely to advance such a morally flawed position and more likely to pursue other authentic human goods. So the bishops leave open a little crack. If you are in a place, you and your well-formed conscience, after taking in as much information as you can, after prayerful consideration, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many people pray before they vote? Don't. Thank you for those. I would recommend that. right? Can voting be a spiritual act? We usually don't think of it that way, right? And that goes back to sort of the compartmentalization, right? At Bishop Kelly High School, we pray before meetings. We pray before a football game, right? Those are not religious activities. We're talking about the budget. We're playing Bishop McGinnis, right? Who we beat last year. Those are not spiritual things, right? But I would argue that if you have not already, to ask for wisdom as you support candidates or don't. It can't just be a secular decision, right? Ask for wisdom. When we have tough decisions to face, and I would say as a country, we have a tough decision. We have a tough decision to make as a people. And so when we have tough decisions, we ask the Holy Spirit for wisdom. I would really encourage you to do so. And maybe that's you pray with your spouse, maybe pray by yourself, and not just doing it the moment you walk in. Come, Holy Spirit, click, right? But today, asking the Holy Spirit to guide you. Lastly, paragraph 37. In making these decisions, it is essential for Catholics to be guided by a well-formed conscience that recognizes that all issues do not carry the same moral weight, and that the moral obligation to oppose policies promoting intrinsically evil acts has a special claim on our consciences and our actions. These decisions should take into account a candidate's commitments, character, integrity, and ability to influence a given issue. That would be where my mom had gone wrong in the Railroad Commission. How often does the Railroad Commissioner get involved in a pro-life related bill? But she wanted to stop him before he could get going. In the end, this is a decision to be made by each Catholic, guided by a conscience formed by Catholic moral teaching. I told you I wasn't going to tell you who to vote for. I can't legally. I guess St. Mary's would lose their tax-exempt status, right? They don't have to give it on Sunday. But it's not for the church to say. For you and for you and for you, a young person or older person, whatever you may be, whatever you're registered as, it's not for us to say who you should vote for and support. But what we do stand for, clearly and proudly, are very certain, basic moral principles. First among them is the dignity of every human life. And out of that comes all the others. And then you go down the list as the bishops have put. On the back side of this, and then we'll take a few questions, comments, have a little discussion. On the back side, it just offers some advice. As Catholic citizens, we should remember three things. Respect for dignity of every person, focus on the common good, and we have a responsibility, a true obligation to form our consciences and participate in the civic life of this nation. Some ways to do that. Be true to the teachings of the Catholic Church. Read Scripture, the Catechism, what the Pope is saying, the statements of our bishops. Be well informed on issues. Remain in contact with our representatives. I would encourage you to do this. If there's a candidate that you absolutely cannot support, you should write to them and tell them why. Now, does Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump, do they sit down and be like, oh no, oh man, Janet doesn't like my decision, right? They may never get to the person you really want them to. Somebody's going to read that letter. Somebody's going to read it. And it might be a 19-year-old staffer, a free intern, right? Somebody's going to read that letter and hopefully be influenced by it. So, make that clear. If you vote for someone because of a certain stance on a certain issue, let them know. And if you don't, let them know. Engage in reason, compassion, and loving dialogue. That's what we talked about at the beginning. And finally, the dual calling of faith and citizenship lies at the heart of what it means to be a Catholic in the United States. When Pope Francis, I don't know about you, one of the proudest moments of my Catholic American life was when Pope Francis walked into the United States Congress last September. How awesome was that? I would recommend that you read that speech. Maybe you saw it. Maybe you saw it live and haven't thought about it since. It's an incredible encouragement to the people of the United States to be true to what it is that we hold dear. It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's going to challenge you politically. If you say I'm a diehard Democrat and you read that, you're going to be challenged. If you're a diehard Republican, you're a diehard Libertarian or Green Party or whatever you may be, that speech and this document of the U.S. bishops is going to challenge you. It's going to pull you out of yourself and more towards the teaching of the Catholic Church, which we all need. Let me stop there. Who would like to say something? Jenny.
I'm not asking who, but do you know who you will vote for?
I don't. She asked, do I know who I'm voting for? I don't. And I would say in the last 2 weeks that if for me, if the election were tomorrow, I would not vote in the presidential election. Now, there's state ballot initiatives that we should get. Usually, like the week before, everyone's like, "There's state ballot initiatives." Shoot, I gotta read up. There's other elections that are going to take place, and so I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote in November. If it were tomorrow, I may hear something tonight. I may hear something next week that changes my mind, but that's where I am at this moment. Please.
Right now, there's a load of crap. What they're saying at these conventions, I think it's more important and more relevant when they debate one-on-one. And get the issues that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. The question was, with the conventions going on, isn't it more important what the candidates have to say to each other one-on-one than what we're seeing in the conventions? Understand, I think seeing with the consumer's, a smart consumer's eye, what we've seen over the last 4 days in Cleveland and what we'll see next week at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, right? Those are made for TV commercials, right? Now, is there substance there? Yeah. Can you get a feel for what's important to the candidate, what's important to that particular party? You can. You see what they're talking about, at what level they're talking about it, who's doing the talking. So you can tell some things. What I prefer to do, typically, is when there's a speech, just as an example, I read just this afternoon, I've not seen the speech that Senator Ted Cruz gave last night. I've not seen it, but I read it. I find, for me, reading it instead of watching it is super helpful for me. Because what I see then is what they're actually saying versus the how they're saying it, right? So when I was reading, and at the end of the speech from Senator Cruz, when he said, I encourage you, my fellow Republicans, to vote your consciences, and pick the best candidate. And at that point, what I've heard is that he got booed. And I was thought, that's odd to boo someone for telling people to vote their conscience, right? Isn't that odd? That seemed weird to me. But as I read it, I didn't know that people were booing at that time, which I think would have influenced me in some other direction. Great question. Please.
I want to know who the libertarians, how the libertarians are on the libertarians.
Great question. The question is, what does the Libertarian Party think about abortion? So libertarians, generally speaking, I don't want to speak for them. I'm not one. You can look up their website. You can call my brother Marty. He's a libertarian. He has a bumper sticker that has a bear with a gun, and it says, "I support the right to keep and arm bears." So the libertarians want as little government as possible. This is a general statement, again. They can speak for themselves. So if it involves government intrusion of any kind, they are opposed to it. So on the question of abortion, there are pro-life libertarians. They're out there. You can Google them and follow them on Twitter and look up their websites. Generally speaking, the Libertarian Party would say that the government should not be involved in those kinds of decisions, including the decision of whether to terminate a pregnancy. Please.
This is rather a long question, but
Go for it.
Why is the Catholic Church so concerned with the tax-exempt status that the homilies never address the issues that you addressed this evening?
Yeah.
Abortion, etc., etc., etc. I understand this. It seems to me there's a paranoia about the Catholic Church and its ministry for years to discuss anything that might be evidence of biasness against the Constitution or anything. But the Catholic Church, I believe, should be advising us to some degree, but not specifically, at least something substantive about where we should be going.
Yeah.
As to what you've done this evening.
Great question. The question was about that the church, and correct me, seems overly concerned with our tax-exempt status, to the point that we as a church, we're not preaching about these issues that are being discussed. So I would say two things. One is there are official proclamations like this one, where people can know how the church feels and how we stand, where we stand. I would say from a priest's perspective, I'm not proposing to speak for any priest, Father Jack in the house, I think there's kind of two things at work. I think sometimes, and I speak for myself on this, that sometimes we lack courage. And that is to stand on a Sunday morning at St. Mary's or anywhere else, to stand on a Sunday morning and to make one's homily, maybe what I just said, to make one's homily about the dignity of marriage, and that there's, what we would say theologically, there's no such thing as same-sex marriage, right? Is a bold thing to say. It's a controversial thing to say. It's going to lead to, I've heard various people will get up and they'll leave. People will write letters. People will stop giving. There's all kinds of some of those reasons. So I think that's a big piece of it. Is a lack of courage sometimes on our part. I think the other part of it, though, I think especially on Sundays, is a very sensitive place. And I've heard it. I gave one homily, 8 years ago or so, and I mentioned the word abortion. And I did it as kind of a litany of other things, kind of like the bishops do. That it's a very important issue, along with other things. And the response that I got, and it was only one, but again, maybe I overreacted. And it was the mother of a 6-year-old who said, "Thank you," she was being sarcastic, "thank you for making me explain abortion to my 6-year-old on the way home from church." And I thought, that was certainly not my intent. So anyway, I say that just by means of those are some of the things that are going through our heads. But I think there also is a sense, among St. Mary's parishioners, I have no doubt, there are many, many people who are very loyal Republicans. There are also many, many people who are very loyal Democrats. And so I think there's a sense of trying to keep it together, but maybe for the sake of, at the expense of, speaking the truth. Because when we do it, I think we can do it in a way, as often said, that we should speak the truth with love. If I get up and I'm railing against this and that and that, and I'm angry about it, right? I'm not angry about it. I think marriage should be between a man and a woman. Because it's awesome, right? That's how God created it. That makes me want to be joyful and shout, right? I'm pro-life. I hate abortion, right? But I hate abortion because I love babies. And I think that life is precious. Right? So we can take the negative side of all the things that we're against as a church, or we can take the positive side, which I think you catch more flies with honey. So anyway, I don't think that answers it entirely. Just to kind of give you some insight as to what maybe some priests are thinking, at least the ones I know. Jerry.
Well, you mentioned that wisdom as the primary faculty that people needed to bring to the table when they entered the voting booth. And wisdom requires solid information and rational thought. And where do we get that now? And that seems to me that the Catholic Church, with their knowledge and expertise and educational facility, to step forth and really try to explain some of these things. There's so many perceptions. The things that you talked about earlier, if I said this, you think I was a Democrat, and you said that, you think I was a Republican. and I think I'm one of the two of those things, and I didn't necessarily agree that when you said that was Democrat or Republican.
Sure.
So there's a lot of perceptions that people bring to the table, and how do you get down to the reality of, so what's really being said, what's really being thought, and where's the truth, instead of getting diverted, like you mentioned earlier, the plagiarism issue.
Sure.
Yeah. Nobody's talking about the issues.
The inside baseball stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jerry's question was, how do we kind of sift through the muck? Maybe
Well, who's got that role of educating people with the truth, whatever the truth is?
Yeah, who has that role? So I would say this. I would say in the United States, first and foremost, the bishops of the United States have that role. And that's part of the reason that this document came out. Now, what percentage of U.S. Catholics are going to read this document in its entirety before November? The answer is 0.052%, right? Not a lot of people are going to sit down with this. Some people might sit down with the one-pager, right? That kind of lays it out. But I mean, that's where I think that falls on the rest of us. That the teaching is proclaimed. Now, do the bishops always do a great job of getting that out? Probably not. I think the second responsibility falls on parents with their children, grandparents with their grandchildren, and then as much as we possibly can with our neighbors and coworkers and people we go to church with, that we have that responsibility to educate one another, and that when a topic comes up, even if it's controversial, that we courageously speak up. Go ahead, Jerry. Follow up.
Yeah, but where you're talking about there, Father, is where the church stands, and you're right, you can get that there. My question is, where do the candidates really stand?
Yeah.
What do the parties really represent? Where are they at? And then they seem to want to tell you anything that will win your vote.
Sure.
And so,
yeah. So where
do you really get that?
Where do the parties stand? So I would do one of two things. One is you can read. One of the things that comes out of these conventions is the official party platform. So the Republicans passed theirs on, I think that was Monday. That was part of one of the news story of the day. So you can go on and you can read what does the Republican Party think about all these things, right? And then next week during the Democratic primary, the Libertarians are going to have their own convention. If they haven't, they maybe have already. You can read those. And then the candidates themselves, I think this gentleman mentioned of watching those debates, seeing what is important to each one of them. On each of their websites, they're going to lay it all out. Now, they're going to lay it all out kind of fluffy and the way that they want to say it exactly. And that's the discerning voter. Unfortunately, we have to sift through all of that. And then we just don't know. We don't always know what we're going to get. I know probably many of you have voted for a particular candidate in the hopes that they were going to turn it around, do whatever we wanted them to do. And then they got there and they didn't. Right? They fell flat, they had a hostile Congress, or whatever your particular leanings can be. And in that way we don't know what we're going to get. But one of the cool things about elections, especially like the congressional elections, which are congressmen and women are elected every 2 years, is we get the opportunity to vote them up or down. Every 2 years, presidents every 4 years, senators every 6 years, mayors every 4 years, state reps and senators. Okay, I think we'll stop there.